Okay. Lovely. So welcome everyone again. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on what part of the world you are in. This is the usual Tuesday tune-in program here at Dasanaya Buddhist Community. And so that means that I'd like to begin with a guided meditation for about 30 minutes. Then I'll move into some kind of Dhamma reflection, Dhamma talk this evening. And for about another 30 minutes or so, 30, 40 minutes. And then there will be time for questions and comments at the end. And as usual, you are welcome to have your cameras on or off, but please do go ahead and mute your mics if you haven't already. And we'll go ahead and get settled into the meditation for tonight. I think for this evening, we're just going to do a simple metta meditation. So you can go ahead and just begin by settling the body. I find it helpful to rock a little bit back and forth, side to side. Maybe move the head a bit, just to loosen up any tension or any tendency to lean toward the screen. And then really beginning to sense the body settling on your seat. Allowing the belly to be soft and relaxed. Really feeling the weight of the body, the natural stability. And then from that steady base, as best you can, allowing the spine to line up and come into an upright posture. The bones stacking one on top of the other, all the way up through the neck. And knowing that the weight is carried by those bones. And allowing also the shoulders and the chest to just soften and relax. No need to hold on right now. And now, having found that embodied presence, just taking a moment to observe the mind. Just allowing thoughts to come and go. Just observing that for a few moments. No need to respond to the thoughts in any way. And now allowing thoughts to recede into the background and turning the attention to the breath. Wherever you find it. Maybe in the nostrils or in the back of the throat. Maybe in the chest or in the diaphragm. Just observing the sensations of the breath coming and going. And with every few breaths or so, just dropping in the phrase of metta. Just like a raindrop in a puddle. May all beings be well. And then attending to the breath. And after a few more breaths, Again, may all beings be well. Just keep practicing like that. Allowing all other thoughts just recede into the background, like the radio in another room. And every few breaths, a thought of metta. May all beings be well. May all beings be well. Really attending to the words mindfully. May all beings be well. May all beings be well. And in these last few moments of the meditation, aware that there are thousands, tens of thousands practicing metta all over the world right now. And you can turn to receiving metta, receiving metta, letting it wash over you. Beautiful friends. So that is our meditation for this evening. Now you can just go ahead and Get comfortable, make whatever shifts you would like to make, and prepare for the Dhamma talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This week, picking up where we left off last week, I'd like to continue to talk about the 7 factors of awakening. So don't worry if you weren't here last week. We can begin at the beginning a bit and review a little bit of what we talked about then, and then move into the second half, so to speak. So the 7 factors of awakening, the Bojjhanga in Pali, is a framework. You could think of it as a framework or as a collection of qualities, of tools, of practices that are all related to, all in support of awakening to the reality of things as they really are. All things as they really are. And to the reality of Nibbana, the unconditioned, the quality that is without any things, you could say. And so the 7 factors, just to name them, so you have sati, which is mindfulness, Dhammavichaya, which is investigation of dhammas, or investigation of states or principles, things. Then you have virya, which is energy, piti, which is joy, and piti is where I'm going to pick up today. And then passaddhi, tranquility, and then samadhi. So samadhi as immersion, or often translated as concentration, unification of the mind. And then equanimity, upekkha. So these are the 7 qualities that are necessary in order to free ourselves from delusion and ignorance, in order to, they're the qualities that support the arising of wisdom. And I talked a bit about those first 3 last week, particularly in terms of the differentiation between mindfulness and investigation. So mindfulness as a attention to a receptive form, a non-judgmental form of attention to phenomena in the present moment. And then investigation as more of a quality of discernment, of study, of understanding causality and process, and is a little bit more, you could say, active type of attention. And then for that reason, then right alongside that, we have energy or effort and virya. And we talked last week about 3 different kinds of effort: the initiating effort, the persisting effort, and then the what's that third kind? That third kind is like the completing type of effort. There's let's see, what was the word that we used? Exertion, for that kind of getting yourself over that final hump. So those 3 tend to work together, and all of the 7 factors actually work together, although they are often also described in a sequential kind of way. And that certainly can be one's experience. But one of the I think more skillful ways of thinking about how to practice with the 7 factors is to begin to become aware of them, to know when they're present or when they're absent, so that you can start to see what is the constellation of qualities in the mind and body at the moment, and how might you think about those factors that are not present. What would help those other factors to also come into being? And so that is the sutta that we're looking at, that we started on last week. The sutta, it's called Kaya Sutta. It's from the, so in the connected discourses of the Buddha, the Samyutta Nikaya in Pali, there's a whole chapter on the 7 factors. So many discourses that were given, not just in this book, actually, in several other collections as well. But this particular sutta we're looking at is 46.2, so chapter 46 in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses. And so I gave a talk about joy a few weeks back, but in particular, the kind of joy that is mentioned here is piti. Piti, so sometimes also translated as rapture. And I used to think that translation of rapture was like excessive, like somebody really being, like pitching us on the idea of joy and practice. But actually, it can be like that. It can be this kind of very, so that's a good point for me to make. So part of the teaching that is embedded in the 7 factors is also a teaching of balance. So mindfulness, sati, that first factor, is understood to be applicable all the time, right? And why is that? Because we can't actually practice with something we're not perceiving. And if we're not mindful, then we're actually not perceiving what's happening in our experience, even though it's right here. And even though there may be some awareness of something that's happening, actually. So a good example of this is like driving a route that you've driven a million times and actually getting there and not remembering how you got there. Did you even stop at the stoplight? Right? So there's some awareness that's doing the activity, but mindful attention isn't there. Because if it were, then you would have a better chance of remembering it, or at least remembering the last bit of it. The most recent present moment. So mindfulness, always useful. And then there are 3 factors that are said to be sort of stimulating. And those are those first 3. So investigation, and then energy and joy, piti, are the 3 so-called stimulating factors, right? So energy makes sense, of course, that it's stimulating. We're talking about how to use our effort in practice. Investigation is stimulating to the mind because, as I said before, it's a bit more active. It's a bit more proactive than the mindfulness needs to be. And so it tends to require some energy and also bring some energy to the mind. because it is more active. And then piti. So piti is generally known as a stimulating quality. It can be very uplifting. It can be, I can say that the piti of the joy of insight is just beyond anything you've experienced before. It will blow your head off. And there are much, much subtler forms of piti also, very, very, very subtle things that might feel like goosebumps or like cold chills without the cold, or different kinds of embodied experiences that are joyful. Even something very subtle like if a certain part of your body relaxes and then you feel a pleasantness associated with that. That can also be a form of piti. And piti generally is, it arises out of relaxation, interestingly, even though it's one of the stimulating factors and it's in this group of the stimulating factors. But my experience is that the relaxation of the body definitely helps for piti to arise. And also the continuity of practice. So piti is generally first experienced in meditation. It can certainly be experienced in other mindful moments off the cushion, but typically it is a meditative quality. And that's where you might start to experience it. And finding piti in your meditation, I will say, is often a big deal. Right? It turns meditation from a chore into something that's really pleasant and nice and much easier to stay with. And so that's why the next factor is tranquility, passaddhi. So when we look at this sutta, which is talking about the nutriments, the fuel, the things that are the basis for these conditions to arise, right? What helps these conditions to arise? Then what we see in the case of the fuel for piti, let's see if I can get my pages in order here, is just things that are the grounds for that. So this happens occasionally in the sutta, as you see, that there isn't a specific list given. It's just things. And what does that mean? It means that there are many, actually, too many to enumerate, too many to list things that can be the basis for your piti, right? So whatever kind of meditative object you're working with, if you develop a sense of relaxation of the mind and body with that object, so this is why I often give the guidance or the instruction during the guided meditations to rest the mind on the object. Rest the mind on the object, right? There's an ease about that rather than a grasping of it. And then, and some continuity, enough, it doesn't have to be perfect continuity, but enough continuity that, again, there's an ability for the mind to just feel like it can enjoy just hanging around, just being present for the object. Then that can bring forth the piti. But then you have this next quality. So the next quality is the passaddhi, is the tranquility, the factor of tranquility. And it says here in the sutta that the two things that are the most helpful for the arising of tranquility are tranquility of body and tranquility of mind. So now this sounds like circular reasoning, right? The things that are helpful for tranquility are tranquility. But what it's pointing at here, I believe, is that that the mind and body have the tendency to support one another in agitation or in the direction of tranquility, right? So if you can steady the body and allow and find that natural stability and find that, right, that steadiness, that groundedness in the body, then that will help the mind, right? That's why we often start the meditation with that kind of feeling your way into that. And then conversely, as the mind starts to ease, then the body can also slow down even more, right? So one of the things that we see in, for example, the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing is that there is a point at which we're allowing the mind to rest on the breath enough that then we can actually calm the body even further. And what does that mean? That means slowly relinquishing these kinds of intentional movements and jostling and fidgeting, right? But just allowing the body to get even more still, even more steady. And so these two aspects tend to support each other. And interestingly, one thing that I also notice is that there can be something that I call porpoising. And by that I mean that either the body or the mind will go through these periods where, and I'm going to use my hand to demonstrate this, so I'll say it out loud as best I can for folks who can't or aren't seeing. Basically, so there's this kind of downward movement, this kind of settling movement, but then there can be a slight upward, right? A slight kind of, not quite ready to settle that far. And then there's a little bit of a feeling of like coming out of it, right? In the mind or in the body. But then it doesn't go all the way back up to where you were. It just starts to settle again. Oh, okay. So we had that little blip of, right? That little blip of kind of coming out of the settling, but then it didn't completely pop out. It just was an expression of a little bit of like burning off some energy. And then it can go down again. So there's this sense of like settling and then a little bit up, but no, then settling even further down, then a little bit up, and then settling even further down, right? So this is what I call porpoising. Like, it doesn't have to look like a straight line or like, you drop the bucket into the well. Oftentimes for most of us, I think that's not the experience, that there's just a immediate settling, right? But that there's a process to it. And it can feel like it's a little up and down sometimes. And that's okay, actually. I think having a sense of like patience or just willingness to observe that, then we're not adding energy to that process. We're just letting those energies kind of work themselves out. So that's how the tranquility is developing. And as I mentioned, there's this great plethora of information about what the commentaries have added to these suttas on the 7 factors and the back and the notes to the Bhikkhu Bodhi translation. And very, very helpful. Bhante, thank you for that. And in particular, so we have the energy and then the joy, and then conditions for the passaddhi, for the tranquility to arise. Nutritious food, a congenial climate, the right posture. So what does that mean? Again, if you want tranquility of body, you want to have, right? You want to feel like, okay, I'm well enough nourished that my body is not agitated about going hungry. You want a congenial climate, so you're not freezing and you're not burning up. Interestingly, for monastics, oftentimes you are. That's part of the practice, actually, is becoming accustomed to very extreme, not very extreme, somewhat extreme temperature changes and learning how to practice and maintain some steadiness with that. But most of the time, if what you're trying to do is really develop this tranquility, the stability, then you want some kind of climate that's not so rough on you that that's all you're thinking about is how uncomfortable you are. And effort at neutrality, avoiding restless people, associating with calm people, and right resolution. So that, I mentioned that at the end of the talk last time. It's in each one of these factors, there is always this last bit of emphasis on associating with people who already have this quality. That will help you. That will help you. So those are the factors for the tranquility to arise. And as I said, the factors don't have to be taken in order. I think for many of us who go around quite stimulated, right, from work, from family life, personal health problems, social media, whatever it is, it can be good to think about starting with the tranquility factor and the mindfulness factor first. And then from tranquility, then we go to this the awakening factor of samadhi. And so one thing that I want to say about this is, as we said before, as it was said before, and I will continue to repeat, so mindfulness has to be present in order for any of these other qualities to be arising. They're all predicated on having mindfulness, at least to a sufficient degree that you can have some clarity, some degree of clarity about what's being experienced. And so, in particular, for concentration, there are these two factors that are mentioned: the factor of serenity and the factor of freedom from distraction. And it says things that are, again, many things. In fact, there are said to be 40 different meditation objects that are good, easy objects for meditation, for immersion style of meditation, or the concentration samadhi style of meditation, including things like the breath, there's a number of colors, the 4 Brahma Viharas, certain nasty aspects of the body. There's a list of various kinds of things. Most people use the breath, or they use the Brahma Viharas. That's my experience, and most people use those rather, or you can use things like earth and things like that are the kasinas, earth, or the 4 elements, all 4 of the basic elements. But things that are the foundation for serenity and freedom from distraction, right? So again, so your paucity, your serenity, your tranquility is helping this process. The mindfulness is supporting this process. Freedom from distraction. So allowing the mind, this is why it's said that the primary sort of defining factor, or the defining quality of a mind that has samadhi is ekagata. It is unified, the unification of the mind. Some people would say one-pointedness. Maybe, but I think that can have a sense of like very narrow, very much narrowing the mind. And actually you need a wide, open, relaxed mind in order to have concentration. That's one of the key aspects that people find quite difficult. And so one other thing related to that is a teaching by Ayya Madina. So she was awakened nun of the Buddha's time, and she was giving she was being asked a number of questions by someone who was relatively new to practice, you could say, and asking her a series of questions about these things. And I'm just looking to see if I mark the page for Ayya Madina and her conversation with this person. Well, I'm not finding the page right off the bat. Okay. Well, that's unfortunate because there was something I really wanted to talk about there with the okay, with Ayamadina and the concentration. So let me see one more place if I can get it here quickly. Just bear with me. It's not going to work that way. Okay. So we'll have to check on that. We'll have to talk about Ayamadina next time. But what I wanted to share also is a story about the way in which sometimes the factors can come together. And then I'll talk about equanimity at the end. And it's a story of how unexpectedly sometimes the factors can come together. And it's this, from a period of time when I was practicing in Japan. I was in a very small rural town, and I was doing takuhatsu. I was doing alms collection and going out and receiving donations from folks in one of the towns where there was a sub-temple of my root teacher's temple. So my root teacher was Sekihara Roshi. He was the abbot of Hoshinji, a monastery in a little town just about an hour northwest of Kyoto. And so we would go out on these alms collection rounds to these little tiny towns in rural Japan. And we were in this town, which was arranged in a kind of unusual way. It wasn't like a grid. It wasn't like streets that were perpendicular to each other or like any kind of a grid that you could discern. It was more like there was one big street, and then there were all these like little curving streets coming off of the main street, like almost like a octopus tentacles. And so we were there as a small group of us. For some reason, there was a small group of us who were doing the alms collection that day. And so each person was going off on their own to go from house to house and chant the Heart Sutra and see if they would receive a donation. So some of you may know that this story is in my book, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but basically we got there and nobody seemed to be home. So I knocked on a few doors, or not knocked, but chanted at a few doors, and nobody was answering the door. And usually that would be, not so great. It's much more fun to actually do alms collection when people are meeting you at the door and giving some kind of dana or chanting together or doing something. But so I was really focused actually on the physical experience. I felt really relaxed, and I'm walking along these really beautiful, rural roads, and nobody is answering the door. So it's not like I'm in a hurry to get anywhere. And I was ringing there's a bell that we carry. So I'm hearing the sounds of the bell, and I'm seeing the beautiful sunlight and the hillsides, and feeling my feet on the ground, and this very clean air, this beautiful, beautiful, like mountain air out there, and kind of mountain air that you can like taste how crisp it is, So all of the senses engaged. And then I looked to my right, and there was a rice paddy there. Now, mind you that rice paddies are very common in Japan, right? I've probably seen thousands of them at this point. But I turned to look at the rice paddy, and there was this moment in which everything else fell away. And there was just the beauty and the vividness and the joy and the clarity of seeing rice paddy. Like not even me seeing rice paddy, but just seeing rice paddy and the beautiful colors. It was like the rice was like waving in the wind. And I still remember to this day, this is why they say sati is related to memory. I still remember to this day, the colors, there's like different shades of green or almost yellow. And I was just mesmerized, right? And so what had happened in that moment was that the mindfulness, right, clicked in with that tranquility, right? Not feeling pressured, mindful of what's going on in body and mind. There's energy, there's effort, right? I'm walking, I'm doing, I'm paying attention. And then this joy came up. Ah, wow. Beautiful joy of how vivid the moment was. And a kind of direct experience where all the other clutter of the mind drops off. Right? So that's approaching a concentration state. So I bring this up as an example because of what I want to also say is that the continuity of our mindfulness practice is important. It's as important off the cushion as it is on the cushion. Right? Because those same phenomena that we are trying to wake up to are present everywhere, all the time, in each moment. And those same instruments, which is body and mind, those same instruments that we have at our disposal are being put to use. So these are the kinds of, this is how we can see that when the qualities come together and click in a certain way, that there can be a shift in perspective that isn't necessarily driven by you. The only part that was driven by you or by me was the mindfulness part, actually. The other conditions coming into place was just, I would say, like a carryover from the practice, from the momentum itself of the practice that had been happening up until that point, on the cushion, off the cushion, and so on. So hopefully that is encouraging. Hopefully that's something that helps you think about how these qualities can be arising for you in each moment and what that might feel like, why that would be a set of qualities that would lead to liberation, that would lead to such a profound shift in your lived experience. And then finally, the quality of equanimity. So equanimity, I think, is oftentimes the hardest one for people to think about. And again, this is one of those places where the Buddha says things that are the ground for equanimity, paying frequent, proper attention to them. Right. So last week we talked in great detail about frequent, proper attention or frequent, wise attention is what is the linchpin for each one of these qualities, right? So again, related to mindfulness, related to how we're applying the mind. And if we look at what the commentaries had to say about equanimity, this is always interesting to me as well. I find that and just one other thing I want to say, 10 other conditions. So the commentaries give us 10 other conditions that are helpful to the arising of samadhi. The first of which is personal cleanliness. And this is one of those times when I have to say, I have no idea what personal cleanliness has anything to do with the arising of samadhi. And actually, personal cleanliness is also mentioned in the commentaries as a factor that's helpful for the arising of investigation. If anybody has any ideas, please feel free. I could make up a reason. I did actually make up a reason a number of years ago. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, that's just really just pure speculation, because honestly, I don't know what personal cleanliness has to do with it. But balancing the faculties, right? So the balance of the mind and the balance of the way of these different qualities that we're bringing forth, right? The level of energy and the level of relaxation, skill in the sign. So getting good at being able to identify your object and stay with your object of meditation. And then this is very interesting, skill in the sign, and also exerting, restraining, right? So this again is back to the question of effort. When are we exerting ourselves? When are we sort of leaning back? And gladdening the mind at the right time. Gladdening the mind at the right time. So knowing also how to bring joy to your practice. Right? Bring joy to your practice. Even something as simple as just reminding yourself, right, that you're doing the practice that the Buddha instructed us to do. For me, sometimes that's just enough to bring a sense of happiness and joy that I'm on the path. And finally, it says looking on with equanimity, and that's why I wanted to go back to that. So looking on with equanimity at the right time is also a helpful factor for the concentration. And Ajahn Punadhammo speaks about this beautifully. Ajahn Punadhammo is a monastic, a Theravada monastic who lives up in Canada. He's at a monastery up there. And he says, yes. The fine art of not paying attention in concentration. There is also a way in which we let go of a number of phenomena, right? We turn the mind away from paying attention to certain kinds of phenomena. We let them slide by, or there can be a literal feeling of like a window closing or a door closing on certain kinds of sense experience, right? And that is all allowing the mind to settle, become more still. And this unification again, right? Not dealing with diversity, but just allowing certain things to slide by. So when I did the guidance of the meditation again today, what was I saying? Allowing the thoughts to be in the background, right? Allowing the thoughts to be like a radio in the other room. When you do that, right, turning the attention in such a way that it's allowing the energy of that to work itself out, but not foster more. So typically that kind of allowing the thoughts to recede into the background can also allow the thoughts to become quieter and quieter. That's the art of non-attention that's required in order for concentration to happen. So in equanimity, so the things, the factors for equanimity, that the 5 additional conditions that the commentators had to share with us are a detached attitude toward beings, toward formations, meaning inanimate objects, and also, as usual, associating with people who have equanimity. And right resolution, avoiding folks who are possessive. And so a detached attitude, we have to be very careful with this idea. It doesn't mean pushing things away, right? It doesn't mean aversion. Aversion is not equanimity. And indifference is also not equanimity. But rather, it is knowing that all things come into being, persist for some time, and then they go out of being. Right? Learning to find our ability to just be with that time and time again. That's why the Buddha, in many suttas, in particular the Lama Sutta comes to mind, he says, the perception of impermanence like a visceral, deep, embodied perception of impermanence, is one of the highest forms of practice. It will change your life. It will change your mind. So equanimity is having seen that over and over again, knowing that what arises and what ceases doesn't have to set us off balance. That is just the natural way. It is the natural way. I often think of it as a mind that's incredibly vast. Because that way, whatever is arising or not arising, or ceasing or not ceasing there, is not setting us off balance, is not creating huge waves, because the mind is so vast that it can encompass all that change. So just to completely finish up here and circle back to where I started last week, we think about these 7 factors and just look at them as a framework, look at them as a set of qualities. I really want to encourage you to think about how simple they are, how possible they are. These are qualities that we definitely can experience. There's no magic to it, other than the magic that's already built into the way the world works. That wonderful, vast, incredible, unknowable aspect. So that is my talk for this evening. Thank you so much.